Hey, how's it going? It's Stephen here, and today we're going to talk about synths. Now, it seems when it comes to mixing these days that everybody's after that big, wide sound. I want to show you how you can achieve that by getting great balance on your synth tracks and also making sure they're nice and wide. Now, by synth tracks, I'm talking about analog synths, digital synths, and VSTs, so you can apply this to any synths that you have within your session. In my session, I've got a synth track that's playing pretty much throughout the whole song. In the intro, pre-chorus, and chorus is playing longer held chords, and in the verse it's playing more stabby chord sounds. This synth in question I believe is a Nord, but let's hear it in the context of the mix with all the processing turned on. Now, obviously, there are no vocals playing at the moment because I wanted to show you what it sounds like with just the instrumental elements. If I strip away all of my processing and play it again, you should notice a huge difference in the width and the balance of the synth. I don't know about you, but I could barely hear that. So let's bring up the level of that synth and overdo it so we can actually hear what's going on. Okay, now you can hear it, but my left ear is so lonely. All you can hear is this synth on the right hand side, and you can actually see it in the waveform here that the balance of that synth sound is actually coming through on the right. In fact, there is no real balance because on the left hand side there is a real minority sound of this synth. So as it stands, the balance of that synth is completely out of whack with the rest of the track. As I mentioned, it's simply only on the right hand side. So we want to even that sound out, make that synth more noticeable so that you can hear it in the mix because we couldn't earlier at all. And we also want to make sure it's nice and wide and clear. The first thing I did was add some EQ. Put in a low cut at around 220, 223. The reason why that's there is because I don't want this synth competing with any of the low end elements of my mix. It's that simple. There's no need for any bass frequencies in this synth. It's simply there to pad out the sound. It's the same in the verse, pre-chorus and chorus. Even though the notes are held longer in the pre-chorus and the chorus, I really don't want any bass. It's just not needed. Then we've got a boost at 656 of 6 dB. Reason why that is there is because it gives a nice mid-range boost to the synth in a frequency range where there are no other competing elements, and I thought it sounded really nice. Got a cut of almost 10 dB at in and around 1K, 1.2K. Reason for that is because I found that the sound of the synth on its own was quite nasally, and in terms of the mix, it was actually crowding the vocal a little bit, and it was also impacting on the guitars. So I pulled out almost 10 dB. This move at 2.6K actually wasn't used, so let's delete that. And then the final move, EQ move, is this high cut at 5.6K. Reason for that, again, lots of cymbals going on, lots of high-end information on the kick and the snare that I want to preserve. I don't want anything competing in that range. Anything on the guitars, any vocal elements, any nice high parts of the vocal, I really don't want anything else competing with that, and there's really no need for this synth to be present in that frequency range. So let's hear what it sounds like with the EQ on. So you can hear it starting to cut through the mix a little bit more now, but it's still quite lopsided. It's still over on the right. We'll get to that later. Next plugin I used was a little bit of the aura compressor, and that is there simply to add a little bit of sustain to those stabs so that it's not as staccato. A little bit of the attack is taken off and you can hear more of the sustain of those chords because I've added in some makeup gain. This compressor is only taking off about 2 to 3 dB at a time, and let's hear what that does. Okay, now the sound is beginning to round out a little bit more. You can hear more of that synth in the track, and it's not competing as much with the guitars or the drum parts. Next thing I want to do is add in some saturation to help the synth cut through the mix a little bit more. So this is the P&M analoger. It's a vintage analog saturator. I use this quite a bit. It's got the mix knob up to 86%, which is quite a lot. I have adjusted the output by minus 3.24 dB. It's got 50% drive on it, so not lots and lots of drive. It's affecting the lows a little bit, and it is affecting the highs quite a lot. So let's hear what this saturator is doing. So that little bit of grit from the saturation helps to emphasize that sustain that we developed with that compressor. And that means that we've achieved a lot more balance already with this synth track in comparison to the guitars, the bass and the drums. You're getting an overall better balanced mix. Now the last plugin on this insert chain is this Brainworks digital. I still have version 2. It's on version 3 now. I simply haven't upgraded yet. And what I've done here is use this mono maker that makes everything below 219 Hertz mono. I don't want anything below that frequency range to be in the stereo section of my mix. Anything below 219 is going to be in that mono section. And if you remembered earlier, I've already cut quite a lot of bass out, so there's not really going to be that much bass present from this synth. A couple of other things going on in this plugin. Nothing has been touched in the mono section. I've increased the stereo width to 141%, so adding some nice width already in this plugin. Nothing crazy. In the stereo section, everything above 7K has been cut, just in case anything is still sticking out, anything is still present. I've also reduced 2.37K by minus 2.3 dB, taking out some more of those mid-range frequencies that were most likely competing with the guitars. So let's hear what it sounds like with this plugin in and out. So keeping in mind that we made some EQ cuts and only increased the stereo width, that sounds a lot more present with this plugin in place. At this point, we've added some nice EQ, compression, a little bit of saturation, and a little bit of stereo width and slight bit more EQ, a little bit of mid-side stuff. But we still haven't really catered for the fact that a lot of this synth is coming through on the right-hand side and our left ear is very lonely, and that affects the balance of the mix. So the first thing that I want to do with that synth is that I made it sound nice and present, but it's still quite dry. It's just sort of bouncing around. Those staccato chords that there's a little bit of sustain on them, but they're a little bit too present now. I can hear it clearly, but I want to push it back in the mix a little bit. So the first step to rounding out the sound, getting a little bit wider and pushing it back into the mix is to add some reverb. And I have used a hall reverb. It's the Manny Marroquin reverb. I went with a preset, the Bright Space. I definitely adjusted this a little bit as far as I remember, but all it is a large hall with no pre-delay. There's a little bit of EQ adjustment around the mids, cutting a little bit of mids, adding a little bit of highs, and adding a little bit of compression to that. Nothing crazy, it's just a simple hall reverb. I then added an EQ and cut everything above 4K, so some brightness was added within that reverb plugin itself. And then after that, I've actually gone and removed quite a bit of that. I've also cut everything below 134. Finally, we've got the S1 imager from Waves, and here's where we start to try and balance things out. I've got quite a lot of width going on, but it is skewed to the left, so my reverb is predominantly going to be on the left hand side. So that means we're evening things out now. We're essentially panning that reverb to the left, and you're going to hear the reflections of that sound that you're hearing predominantly on the right coming through the left side, left speaker, or your left ear on headphones. It is subtle, but it is there, and you could hear it a lot more when I pushed the fader of that send a lot higher. And just so you get a feel for it, let's listen to that reverb on the synth in solo. So now we've rounded out the sound of that synth quite nicely. We've got the sound starting and originating on the right hand side and the reflections over on the left with that nice hall reverb and a little bit of stereo width to that. Now we want to take it a little bit further, and I've got this synth effects send to do just that. You'll notice straight away on this synth effects that it is panned predominantly to the left because we're trying to add a little bit more balance and a little bit more width to this synth, and the left hand side is just crying out for that. This synth effects track has 3 plugins. We've got this LS rotator plugin, which is essentially a Leslie moving speaker. We've got this Cool Vibe plugin, which is an emulation of Jimi Hendrix's Uni-Vibe pedal. It adds a sort of vocal quality to the sound. And third, we've got the PM chorus ensemble, which is adding some chorus, adding some modulation to the sound. But this is all going to be over on the left hand side. I'll put this in pre so that you can hear what it sounds like without the fader move. Taking this out of pre and hearing what it would sound like in the mix. So the whole idea of adding this movement, the Leslie rotating speaker, the Uni-Vibe vocal quality, and this chorus is that it will catch our ear over on the left hand side, because that's where we want to pad out and balance this, widen this synth sound. They're all quite subtle moves, but they really do add up in the context of the mix. The next sound I've got is this synth MVMT track, MVMT standing for movement. And on that, I've got the Waves Mondo mod, which is another chorus modulation plugin, and it is BPM synced in this instance. Now I've got an REQ, taking out everything above 1.8 and everything below 184. Finally, the lo-fi plugin. The reason why that's been added is because I want to create this really nice kind of underwater sound. So I've adjusted the sample rate to 4.9 kilohertz. The sample size is down to 15 bits. There's no distortion or saturation added. This is simply just to create that kind of, like I said, underwater sound. So let's bring in each of these plugins. I'll put this in pre once again so you can hear what it sounds like. And now what this sounds like in the mix with the synth track in solo. So just adding that extra little bit of movement again. It's going from left to right. It's that little bit of underwatery sound. It's just in the background. It's just helping things get a little bit more balance between left and right. You'll notice here at the very end, I've got another with send. That is simply for the chorus. That is not on in the verse, and that is just to open up my chorus. And very quickly, I'll go through that, even though I'm not playing it right now. I've got a stereo width plugin, the Air Stereo Width. I have the S1 Imager, adding more width. I've used this Pensado 3D width preset. And then finally, I've got center, taking out everything in the middle, adding everything to the sides, the low, the high, the punch. And there's only a little bit being sent to this when we get to the chorus, just to add that extra bit of width, because in this part of the mix, the synth track is playing more longer held notes. So we want to make sure that that is audible. Going back to the verse where this width plugin is not in use, let's once again compare what our inserts and our sends are doing to widen and balance this synth sound in the mix. So now that synth track is wider, it's better balanced, and it cuts through the mix a lot more without taking over, and it's still just complementing the rest of the elements of the mix, because it really isn't one of the most important elements at all. Now there are just some very simple tips and techniques that you can use to widen your synths and create more balance in your mix. You can take all of these concepts from the EQ, the compression, the saturation, mid-side EQ, the mono maker, all of this stuff, the reverb, and adding width and adding balance to one side that's a little bit more uneven than the other. All of these things can be taken into account and applied to various different elements in your mix. So don't think of this as just applying to synths. This applies to anything in your mix and can really help add to the balance and width overall. I really hope that these tips make a massive difference to your mixing. And before I go, I want to give you something else for free that I know is going to make a massive difference to your mixes. I know this because I get emails and comments every day of the week from my subscribers over at understandingaudio.com telling me exactly how much this has helped their mixing. What I'm talking about is my free guide, the one hack that guarantees a unique pro sounding mix, and I want to give it away to you for free today. All you have to do is go over to getpromixes.com, download the guide for free, take it away, do whatever you want with it, but I guarantee you that you're going to see great results if you apply the action steps that are in the guide. So download it for free at getpromixes.com. When you're done with that, make sure to leave a comment down below and let me know what you do to get wider, balanced synth sounds in your mix. And if you're feeling really generous, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you got a lot out of it. Keep making great music, and I'll see you soon.